lecture, and in this video lecture I will be discussing neural and chemical regulation of breathing, and this is for the chapter breathing and exchange of gases. And if you've followed my previous videos, I have promised you that I'll make a video on this particular topic. Okay, so today we will be discussing neural and chemical regulation of breathing. I'll just change the pen so it's more clear for you guys. Okay, so neural and chemical regulation of breathing, and let's start. So in this particular video lecture, I will be discussing mainly automatic regulation of breathing, followed by voluntary regulation of breathing, and then a little story time for you guys. And the story's name is Ondine's Curse, okay, where you will understand the connection between voluntary and involuntary regulation of breathing. Okay, so let's begin. Automatic control. All right, wow, this is a lot of stuff on one page, but don't worry, you don't need to worry about this. I will go step by step and I'll explain how neural and chemical regulation of breathing works. So what I've done is I've combined both the topics, neural and chemical, together, and this is automatic control. Okay, this is involuntary control. So this is a very important part of your syllabus. You need to understand this very clearly and carefully, because most of the questions come from this topic, neural and chemical regulation, and it is and once you understand this, what are the changes happening within the blood, and you know how the neural part is working along with the changes in the blood, it'll be very easy for you to answer the questions. Okay, so we will so don't worry, we will go step by step on this topic. Okay, let's begin with the neural part. Okay, so you have DRG. DRG is dorsal respiratory group of neurons. Okay, dorsal respiratory group of neurons, and they are present in the medulla. They are present in the medulla, and DRG is present on the dorsal side. Okay, they're present on the dorsal side of the medulla. Okay, and they are also known as pre-Potzinger complex. Okay, pre-Potzinger complex is extra piece of information for you guys. Okay, now they are called the pacemaker cells in medulla. Okay, now you have like pacemaker cells in the heart, right? So there are similar pacemaker cells in the medulla. They are constantly stimulated and they are allowing breathing to happen involuntary, that's automatically. Okay, so these are called DRG, dorsal respiratory group of neurons. Now how does this work? Okay, so these send impulses in a rhythmic spontaneous discharge. Okay, rhythmic spontaneous discharge, also called as ramp manner, in the form of ramp manner. I'll show you what that means. If you watched my previous videos, you must be familiar with this particular diagram. Okay, so what happens is signals are sent in a ramp's form. Okay, signal is sent in the DRG in a ramp form, and this is automatically happening in your body, in the medulla. Okay, that's how you're able to automatically breathe, even when you're resting, when you're sleeping. So the DRG is always functioning and it is sending signals, instantaneous signals. Okay, and it is in the form of ramp manner. Now what does this ramp manner mean? That means when your lungs fill up with air, air does not immediately move into the lungs. It is slowly getting filled up, slowly. Okay, slowly getting filled up in the form of ramp. Okay, so it is slowly getting filled up in the form of a ramp. So this is called a ramp signal, inspiratory ramp signal. That is, and this lasts for 2 seconds. Okay, this inspiratory function lasts for 2 seconds. That means air is slowly moving. You never realize that, oh, suddenly air has moved into a lungs and suddenly it's expanded. No, it slowly moves and it slowly fills your air with your lungs with air. Sorry. So this is how it moves. Okay, this is how it looks like in the form of a diagram. Okay, this is an inspiratory signal that is sent, okay, in the form of a ramp. Okay, and now this, then later on we'll come to what happens to the muscles. So let's go back to the flow chart. So a rhythmic discharge, spontaneous discharge happens in the form of a ramp. Okay, that means slowly air is moving in. Okay, slowly air is moving and filled into your lungs. Now what happens is this DRG, the cells in the DRG, the neurons in the DRG, they send signals to the motor neurons in the spinal cord, and which then stimulate the inspiratory muscles. Now, which are the inspiratory muscles that are functioning? That is diaphragm and external intercostal muscles. Okay, so diaphragm, which is written as DG, and external intercostal muscles are being activated. Okay, so the DRG sends a stimulus to the motor neurons in the spinal cord, and then via that they are instigating the inspiratory muscles. Okay, get up, you need to now inhale, you need to expand, contract, so then air is allowed to move into the lungs. Okay, so this is all happening through the DRG. So what happens is stretching of lungs happens. Okay, so when the lungs stretch, obviously air is allowed to move in. That means the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles contract, so stretching of lungs happen. Okay, now when stretching of lungs happens, now there are some stretch receptors in the lungs. Okay, some stretch receptors are there in the lungs, and they are connected with the vagus nerve. Okay, this is the afferent vagal fiber. Okay, they are connected to the vagus nerve. Okay, there are some stretch receptors present in the lungs, and they are connected to the vagus nerve. So now when the lungs are stretching, those stretch receptors are getting slightly stimulated. Okay, there is air moving in, we are aware of that. That air is moving in, those vagus nerves get stimulated. Okay, via that stretch receptors. Okay, so the vagus nerve sends a signal to the DRG. This is called the Hering-Breuer inflation reflex. Okay, this is called the Hering-Breuer inflation reflex, and it says it stops inspiration and switches to expiration. What it does, it stops inspiration, switches to expiration. So the vagus nerve is saying, okay, I know air is getting filled in, but there is a limit to how much air that can be filled into the lungs. You can't just keep filling in air. There has to be a limit, right? There has to be a stop button somewhere. So this Hering-Breuer inflation reflex sends a negative impulse to the DRG. Okay, it's like, okay guys, you have to stop now. You can't keep inhaling air. Okay, so then the DRG stops in inspiration, and this Hering-Breuer then what happens, switches to expiration. Expiration, is a passive process, so the muscles relax. The external intercostal and the diaphragm muscles relax, and air moves out. Okay, expiration happens. So this is one thing. So this negative sign means a negative stimulus is sent. Okay, positive sign, the positive stimulus is sent. Now this Hering-Breuer inflation reflex is also like a protective mechanism for you. So on an average, if the tidal volume becomes 3 times the normal, okay, when there's too much air, 3 times the normal of tidal volume, then this takes over. It's like, okay dude, you guys have to stop now, we cannot take in more air. So it sends a very strong impulse to the DRG. Come on guys, we have to stop now. Okay, so this is one part of this whole process where inspiration switches to expiration. Okay, now there is one more thing. There is a pneumotaxic center in the pons. A pneumotaxic center is present in the pons, and I believe it's there in the NCERT also. So this is present in the pons, and this also has a similar function as the vagus nerve, the Hering-Breuer inflation reflex. Okay, so it also has a stop button, a switch off button, and it stops inspiration and switches to expiration. Okay, the same thing happens, and this is present in the pons, and this is present in the lungs. Okay, the vagus nerve is sending via this stretch receptor impulse. Okay, so again I put a negative sign here, that means it's a stop impulse. It's a negative impulse, guys, stop. Okay, so both of them have a similar function, the Hering-Breuer as well as the pneumotaxic center in the pons. Okay, clear? So we have DRG as a pacemaker that is automatically sending spontaneous impulses to breathe, and it's in a ramp form. Okay, in a ramp form, so which in turn stimulates or contracts the inspiratory muscles, and then stretching happens, and then a vagus nerve is there present in the lungs, as well as pneumotaxic center present in the pons, and they stop the inspiration, okay, and allow expiration to happen. Okay, if you look at the ramp signal, yeah, over here, so over here I have written over here switch off point by pneumotaxic center. Okay, they're like a switch off after 2 seconds. Okay guys, you need to stop now. Okay, so stop inspiration and switch over to expiration. Okay, so the muscles relax and then expiration happens. Very clear. Okay, this is quite simple. Okay, now there is one more center that is present in the pons. We won't discuss this in too much detail. It's called the apneustic center. Okay, it's called the apneustic center, and it is also present in the pons, and this is the opposite of the pneumotaxic center. Okay, this function of the apneustic center is the opposite. That means it prolongs inspiration. Pneumotaxic stops inspiration, this prolongs inspiration. Okay, just erase this part. All right, cool. I hope everything is clear till now. Okay, now we have studied how the normal inspiration expiration works. Yeah. Okay, so now for example, yes, now let's imagine a situation where the pneumotaxic center is damaged. Okay, I will change this. The pneumotaxic center is damaged. Okay, we don't have a pneumotaxic center. So what happens? What will be the inspiration and the expiration, the timing of inspiration, expiration, how will the respiratory rate change, how will the tidal volume change? Now, when the pneumotaxic center, imagine if a situation, hypothetically, pneumotaxic center is damaged. So what happens? The inspiration will be prolonged. Yeah, inspiration will be prolonged because Hering-Breuer inflation reflex will work, but pneumotaxic center is not working. Okay, so inspiration will be a little prolonged. It will increase. Inspiration time will increase. So that means respiratory rate will reduce. The tidal volume will increase. Respiratory rate will reduce. Okay, if you look at the ramp signal, just imagine. Yeah, I'll erase this part. If the pneumotaxic center, imagine that, then the respiratory timing will increase a little bit. Yeah, so then what happens? The tidal volume will increase and the respiratory rate will decrease. Okay, these are the changes that will happen. Just imagine if the pneumotaxic center is damaged. Okay, let's go back to this flowchart. Now let's imagine if the Hering-Breuer inflation reflex is damaged, but the pneumotaxic center is working. Okay, Hering-Breuer inflation reflex is damaged, but the pneumotaxic center is working. Again, the same thing will happen. Inspiration will be prolonged. Inspiration will be slightly prolonged. It will come to an end, but it will be slightly prolonged. That means tidal volume will increase, but respiratory rate will decrease. Okay. Now imagine if you put an electrode. If you put an electrode in the pneumotaxic center. Okay, let's imagine a situation where you have put an electrode in the pneumotaxic center and you are constantly giving it impulses. If you are put an electrode in the pneumotaxic center and you are constantly giving it impulses, you are stimulating it constantly, what will happen then? That means, think about it. You can pause the video and think about it. What will happen to the tidal volume and the respiratory rate? Respiratory rate will increase. and tidal volume will decrease here. Okay, so if you're constantly stimulating the pneumotaxic center by placing an electrode in this is a hypothetical situation. You are constantly stimulating it. What happens? The respiratory, you're constantly reducing inspiration, you're reducing the expiration time also. So again inspiration, then again expiration. There's constant change in your inspiration and expiration rate. The timing has reduced. Okay, and so the tidal volume will decrease in this case, but the respiratory rate will increase. Okay, so you understand how this pneumotaxic and this Hering-Breuer inflation, the vagus nerve, how those two things function. Okay, this should be very clear now how they function. So if any kind of question is ever asked, you should be able to answer it very easily. Now you're very clear of what the pneumotaxic center actually does and what this vagus nerve does in the lungs. Okay. Now let's move on to the next part of the neural regulation. Now we've understood DRG, right? Now imagine a situation where you've done heavy exercise, very strenuous exercise. So the DRG gets heavily stimulated. It gets heavily stimulated, and so there are lots of impulses in the DRG, lots of impulses because of the heavy exercise. There are lots of impulses, and some of these impulses spill over to VRG. Now there's another character in the story called VRG. Okay, and that's called the ventral respiratory group. Okay, there's a ventral respiratory group of neurons also present in the medulla, but from the name itself you can understand it's present on the ventral side of the medulla. DRG is on the dorsal side, this is on the ventral side of medulla. So impulses switch over to VRG. Okay, like DRG is telling VRG, okay, I really need help here, so please handle the situation. Okay, so imagine if there's a heavy exercise situation and you've been like running a marathon, a very like long marathon, or a flat race, 100 meters, 200 meters flat race and all, and you're like you need to hyperventilate. Okay, so DRG switches over to VRG. Okay, it sends impulses to VRG. Now VRG has inspiratory neurons as well as expiratory neurons. Okay, so VRG, what it does is it sends impulses to the abdominal muscle contraction. Okay, it allows abdominal muscle contraction. That means it's sending impulses to the abdominal muscle to allow forceful expiration. That when you are hyperventilating, your abdominal muscles are also contracting. Okay, so it has expiratory neurons along with inspiratory neurons. So it allows abdominal muscle contraction as well as it's sending signals to the motor neurons and spinal cord, and then followed by the inspiratory muscles, where again stretching of lungs happens. Okay, so VRG has two functions: inspiratory plus expiratory neurons, whereas DRG is only inspiratory. Okay, DRG is only inspiratory and VRG is inspiratory plus expiratory. That means it is allowing the abdominal muscles also to contract. Come on, okay, we need to work extra hard now because we really need to hyperventilate and allow exchange of gases to happen quickly. Okay, so this is the job of VRG. Otherwise VRG is quiet. When you're sitting down normally, like how I'm sitting down now, you're sitting down in front of your computer or your mobile and you're watching this video, you're doing normal quiet breathing, so there is no problem in that. So that time only DRG is in function. That is your automatic respiration, the regulation that is happening. But when you have undergone some very heavy exercise, you really need to hyperventilate. Okay, you're desperate now, your body is desperate, come on, we need to hyperventilate. Then the signals are sent over to VRG. It's like DRG is telling VRG, okay, VRG, I really need your help now. Okay, so VRG is like, okay, fine, I'll help you. And so it sends signals to the inspiratory muscles as well as the expiratory muscle, that is the abdominal muscles, to forcefully expire. Okay, this is clear? Okay, great. Just erase this part. I hope this is all very clear. This is simple neural regulation. There are like 4 main characters. There is DRG, which is the main one. Then you have the vagus nerve. Remember, there are 4 main characters here. You have your DRG, you have your vagus nerve here, And then you have your pneumotaxic center here, and you have your DRG over here. These are 4 main characters in the neural regulation. Simple. See, I've tried to put everything in a flowchart so that it is easy for you guys to understand. You can write it down in your notebooks also, and you can use it for future reference, okay, when you're studying for the exam. Now, we will look at the chemical regulation. Okay, we will look at the chemical regulation of breathing. So, let's look at the central chemoreceptors first. Here, central chemoreceptors in medulla. Okay, as you know, it is in the medulla. I've already mentioned it. It is present on the ventral side of medulla. Central chemoreceptors are present on the ventral side of medulla. Okay, and now these are very sensitive to changes in the blood gases. Okay, they're very sensitive to changes in the blood gases. Alright. Now, let's say this red cylinder that you see here is an artery that is passing by the brain. And for some reason, let's say if you've done very intense exercise, the PCO2 levels have risen. The PCO2 levels have risen in the artery. Now, what happens when PCO2 levels have risen in the artery? Central chemoreceptors in the medulla get excited, they get stimulated. Okay, when PCO2 levels are excited, are increased in the artery, the chemical central chemoreceptors in the medulla get excited. Even when when PCO2 levels rise, the H plus ions also levels rise in the blood. When PCO2 levels rise, H plus ions also levels rise in the blood. They also stimulate the central chemoreceptors in the blood, right? But now, when it comes to activation of central chemoreceptors, there is a blood-brain barrier. Okay, there is a barrier that separates the two, that segregates the artery from the chemoreceptors that are present inside the brain. So, when H plus ions and CO2 blood gases, they increase in the artery, the CO2 can pass through that blood-brain barrier. Okay, the CO2 has the ability to pass through that blood-brain barrier, but the H plus ions cannot pass. H plus ions don't have the ability to pass through the blood-brain barrier. CO2 gas, the CO2 gas can pass through the blood-brain barrier. Okay, and enter the interstitial fluid and the CSF, the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. Okay, so now when CO2 passes through the blood-brain barrier, what happens? CO2 reacts with water to form carbonic acid, that H2CO3. I've not written that here, but it forms H2CO3 and then dissociates to H plus and HCO3 minus. Okay, it dissociates to H plus and HCO3 minus, and this H plus then stimulates the central chemoreceptors. So ironically, H plus is actually activating the central chemoreceptors. The H plus ion is present in the blood, it cannot do anything. In the artery, it cannot do anything. It cannot even cross the blood-brain barrier. The CO2 can cross. CO2 has the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier, and how that is stimulated by forming the H plus ions. It causes a reaction with water to form carbonic acid, then forms H plus and HCO3 minus ions, and this H plus ions then stimulate the central chemoreceptors in medulla. Okay, this stimulates the central chemoreceptors in medulla, and then that activates the DRG. Okay, that in turn activates the DRG. Okay, it's time to now ventilate, hyperventilate, or whatever the situation may be. Now just imagine a situation, let's hypothetically imagine if in the artery, in the blood, the artery that is going past the brain, CO2 levels are stagnant. Okay, there is no change in CO2 levels, but H plus ions have increased. Then will there be any change in the central chemoreceptors? Think about it. You can pause and think about it. There will be no change, right? There will be no change if CO2 is stagnant and H plus ion is increasing, because that will not activate the central chemoreceptors in the blood. This is a hypothetical condition that I am talking about, because H plus ions cannot pass the blood-brain barrier. and then do any reaction. But when the CO2 passes by, H plus ions are formed inside that blood-brain barrier, inside the brain, and then that stimulates the central chemoreceptors. Okay, you get that? Okay, so this is with central chemoreceptors. Now let's look at peripheral chemoreceptors. Peripheral chemoreceptors over here. Now you have two peripheral chemoreceptors, the aortic bodies and the carotid bodies. Okay, the aortic bodies are present in the aortic arc of the heart, and the carotid bodies are present in the bifurcation of the carotid artery. Okay, the bifurcation of carotid artery. I'll just erase everything that is unnecessary now to explain. Let me take another one. Okay, so we have the aortic bodies and the carotid bodies. Now they are sensitive to changes in oxygen, CO2 and H plus ions. Okay, they are sensitive to changes in the O2, CO2 and H plus ions. Now let's remember one thing. When you are talking about this regulation of breathing, what is the main purpose of all this? Okay, what is the main purpose of this regulation of breathing? This is to maintain constant CO2, H plus and O2 in the blood, right? You want to have a balanced CO2, H plus and O2 in the blood to be able to have a normal system functioning. Always there has to be balance maintained in nature. You can't have an imbalanced situation. Okay, so the whole purpose of this is to maintain the CO2, H plus and O2 in the blood. Okay. So we have CO2, H plus and O2. Now these peripheral chemoreceptors are sensitive to changes in the oxygen levels. Okay, they are sensitive to changes in the oxygen levels. So if there's a drop in the oxygen levels, they get immediately stimulated. Okay, they have to get stimulated and then send a signal via the vagus nerve and the herring and glossopharyngeal nerve to the medulla. Okay, but they are also sensitive to changes in the CO2 and H plus, not only oxygen. It is also sensitive to changes in the CO2 and H plus. Okay, so if CO2 increases or H plus increases, it will also send signals. Okay, it will also send signals to the brain. Okay, and they are less potent. That means they are not very active, but when they become active, they send a fast signal to the brain. Okay, the CO2, if they notice changes in the CO2 and H plus, they're not very active, but when they become active, they send a quick signal to the brain. Okay, they immediately stimulate the peripheral chemoreceptor and then send a signal to the brain. Now over here we spoke about high CO2, high H plus ions and low oxygen. Okay, they stimulate and they cause hyperventilation. But what if the opposite happens? What if the CO2 levels are dropped or H plus ions are dropped? Okay, so then what happens? The opposite reaction always happens over here. Hypoventilation will start. Now we have seen here that when CO2 levels rise or H plus ions levels rise or O2 levels drop, it is stimulated, right? That means it results in hyperventilation. But if the opposite happens, it will result in hypoventilation. Okay, so that means they are interchangeable that way. Okay, these reactions are opposite. Okay, when the levels change in the blood. Okay, so let's look at O2 now. We know that when a drop in O2 happens in the blood, these peripheral chemoreceptors happen. But now this O2 level drop is only active when it is less than 60 mm mercury. Now why is that? Now we know that arterial blood has oxygen levels of 95 mm mercury. Okay, we know that oxygen levels have arterial oxygenated blood has 95 mm mercury. We'll look at it in a little bit of detail. Okay, I will erase this part so I can explain it here. But when in the peripheral, when the oxygen levels drop to 60 mm mercury, only then it activates the peripheral chemoreceptors. Now why is that? Okay, now we know that arterial blood has 95 mm mercury, but let's assume it is dropping to 80, then it is dropping to 75, gradually dropping. Okay, now what happens during that period? Now we are aware of the fact, aware of the fact that Hgb, that is hemoglobin, along with oxygen, exists as HbO2, oxyhemoglobin in the blood. Okay, so now we are aware of this fact that also that oxygen levels are gradually dropping. Okay, that means HbO2 will also drop. That means hemoglobin molecules will increase in number. Correct? Hemoglobin molecules will increase in number. That means you'll have more free Hb molecules everywhere. There's Hb in the blood. Everywhere there's Hb in the blood floating around. There's no oxygen attached to that. Now, in nature, Hb is a weak acid. Hb is a weak acid. Okay. Now Hb is a weak acid. So what happens is H plus ions decrease because of that. H plus ions decrease. That means what happens to the pH level? pH level increases. pH level increases. Okay. So let's go back to the flow chart over here. Now pH levels are increasing over here. PO2 is dropping, so it is sending a signal. Okay, it is sending a signal here, but pH levels are also increasing. So this is telling the DRG, okay, we need to hyperventilate. Telling the peripheral chemoreceptors to send a signal to DRG, okay, now it's time to hyperventilate. But because of the rise in the H plus ions, there's a decrease in the H plus ions, so there's rise in the pH, which is saying that no, you don't need to hyperventilate, let's hypoventilate. Okay, there's an opposite reaction. See, over here when I said the H plus ions are increasing, that means it is hyperventilation. But here when the H plus ions decrease, when the pH levels rise, is hypoventilation. So till 60 mm, these two actions, hyperventilation, hypoventilation, they negate each other. They cancel each other out at the DRG, in the medulla. That means there is no action occurring. Okay, you are saying hyperventilation, but we can hypoventilate also. So these two reactions till 60 mm, till the oxygen levels in the blood are 60 mm, it is negating. Both those actions are negating each other. Okay, so there is no action. There is no need to panic, for the brain to panic. Okay, now we need to do something about it. But what happens when the oxygen levels drop below 60? When the oxygen levels drop below 60, okay, what happens? Then this action takes over. So, okay, now we cannot cancel each other out. Now I have to take over. Okay, now the oxygen levels, when it becomes very extreme, when it becomes 60 mm, because still 95 to 60 mm, even the tissues were getting enough oxygen. Okay, we can manage, it's fine, we can all do fine, we're all doing well, the cells are receiving their oxygen levels, everything is happening normally. But this is a very dangerous situation when the PO2 levels drop below 60 mm. Okay, then it sends a very strong impulse, it takes over, sends a very strong impulse to the peripheral chemoreceptors, which in turn stimulate the DRG, and then heavy breathing, hyperventilation begins. Okay, so this is the reason why only when oxygen levels drop below 60 mm, this action happens. Till 60 mm, nothing happens. And you know why? Because hemoglobin as such is a weak acid which raises the pH in the blood. So it is an opposite reaction, and so both are cancelling each other out. Okay, now that you see here PCO2 H plus ions are high, that means hyperventilation. If it's the opposite, it's hypoventilation. Okay, please remember that. Okay, so we have spoken about peripheral chemoreceptors. Okay, I think I've covered everything in this flow chart over here. We have spoken about the neural part, we have spoken about peripheral and the central chemoreceptors and how they interact with each other. Yeah, and the pneumotaxic center, the Hering-Breuer reflex, the VRG. I think so. In short, you've noticed how they are all interacting with each other. How the group of neurons and the changes in the CO2, O2 and H plus ions are there, if therefore impacting the neurons to stimulate, to increase respiration or to decrease the breathing, whether it needs to hyperventilate or hypoventilate. Okay, so I hope this was clear to you. So we'll move on to the next topic. We've already discussed this. So now we will talk about voluntary control. Now what we have spoken about was automatic control, where you don't have to do anything consciously. The body has its own system. It's an inherent system inside, and it is already performing its functions as it is. Okay, there is no problem at all. Now what about voluntary control? It's simple. The cerebral cortex, okay, the cerebral cortex, it controls all the conscious decisions that you make. So cerebral cortex has the ability to bypass this respiratory center, the medulla. You see the respiratory center, the DRG, right? It has the ability to bypass this respiratory center in the medulla and then impact the motor neurons in spinal cord, which then impact the inspiratory muscles. Okay, that means the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. Okay, so this is the job of the cerebral cortex. It just bypasses the respiratory center in the medulla and then in turn stimulates the motor neurons in the spinal cord, which then stimulates the inspiratory muscles. Now what happens when you are holding breath? When you go underwater or anywhere, consciously, you hold your breath, right? You are doing that by conscious. Okay, that means the cerebral cortex has overtaken the respiratory center in the medulla. But you cannot do that forever. You can't keep holding your breath for so long. Eventually what happens? The PCO2 levels rise in the blood, right? The PCO2 levels rise in the blood, and then that activates the chemoreceptors, which we have already studied, and then that activates the DRG. Okay, so there is a limit to how long you can hold your breath. At one point you will lose your breath. Okay, you'll have to give up. You'll have to give up the conscious decision of holding your breath, and the automatic control will take over. Okay, the automatic control takes over. Auto mode has started. Okay, let's look at it this way. The auto mode has started. Okay, and your voluntary control is no longer active. Okay, so this wakes you up from that. You have to give up on your breath, on your holding of your breath, and so the automatic mode starts this way because the PCO2 levels rise, which then activate the respiratory center in the medulla, and then you have to give up. Okay, I can't hold it anymore. Okay, so this is the voluntary control, where the cerebral cortex has the ability to take over the automatic control, but it can do only for a short period of time till the PCO2 levels rise in the blood, and then the automatic mode starts. Okay, so this was simple. Alright, so now it's story time. Okay, Ondine's curse. Okay. Ondine's curse is a very interesting story, and through this story you can understand the difference between how auto mode, that is the involuntary mode, and the voluntary mode function together. Okay, so let's look at it in a little bit of detail. It's actually a German legend, and the legend says that Ondine was a water nymph. Okay, like a mermaid, let's say, to make things simple, who had an unfaithful mortal lover. That means her lover was a human being. She was a water nymph. but her lover was a human being and he was unfaithful to her. So the king of the water nymphs, he casts a spell, a curse on the mortal lover by taking away all his automatic functions. Okay, so the king, he casted a curse on the human being, the mortal lover, and took away all his automatic functions. So just imagine if the automatic breathing is disrupted. So what happens? The cerebral cortex has to take over and continuously breathe. So you are consciously taking a decision to breathe when you are awake. So to survive, he had to stay awake and voluntarily breathe. Okay, so he had to stay awake, and because the DRG is disrupted. So now what do? So you have to constantly, to maintain a level, you have to constantly ventilate, right? To maintain a normal CO2, O2 and H plus ion level in the blood. So voluntarily he would start breathing. Okay. But eventually he falls asleep. Okay, he fell asleep from sleep exhaustion, which killed him. Okay, so now what happens is, let's imagine, like, if the DRG is not functioning anymore, so cerebral cortex, you have to takes over, and it has to, and you take a conscious decision to breathe. But okay, you at one point you will fall asleep because you will be exhausted. So you fall asleep again, the PCO2 levels rise in the blood, and that wakes you up. Oh my god, I have to start breathing now. Okay, so you start breathing. Again you will fall asleep, again the cerebral cortex will wake you up. Okay, you have to continuously start breathing. Why? Because the PCO2 levels are rising in the blood. When you fall asleep, you're not breathing, but the PCO2 levels are rising in the blood. So that wakes you up and you voluntarily start breathing. But how long can you do that? At one point you will be exhausted. You will be exhausted and you will fall asleep, and in your sleep only you will die. So this is what happened to that mortal, that person, the human being. Okay, so he had to give up at one point. He was so exhausted, the cerebral cortex was so exhausted, it had to sleep, and it was not able to, the PCO2 levels rose in his blood, and that could not wake him up because he was so exhausted. And so with the rising PCO2 levels, which eventually killed him. Okay, so this is how you understand how auto mode and voluntary mode function together. Okay, you will come across this particular story when in your MBBS, when you start studying in your medical college. So I thought I'll give you a heads up on what you're going to expect. But yeah, this is quite an interesting story on understanding the auto mode and the voluntary mode. All right. Okay, and so this was it for today, and I hope you've enjoyed today's lecture, and I hope you've learned something new from today. And so please like, share and subscribe to MG NEET Biology, and I will see you in the next video lecture. Bye.